Alrighty, good evening, everyone. I have a copy of last week's lesson, which is the continuation of tonight. So, does anybody need one? So, we're continuing last week's tonight. It says part 2 of Captain Caveman. Anybody else need one? Got one? Everybody good? Cracks me up. Some people are fanning, and other people are bundling up like they're headed to the. Takes all to make the world go around. Two things. One, I was glad to hear that Keith Nutley was a fan of this cartoon like me, and we don't have the audio, so Keith was going to do it for us, right? No? Okay. All right. I am not doing it. But I do want to tell you a story before we get started tonight. So, every year, when we go on our hunt, I get what's called redneck stemware. It's a little trophy. It's a solo cup, and we get something like that to hand out. And so we don't say if it's for the biggest this or that or the longest shot. It just depends. We let the hunt define who gets the trophy. So when we were practicing and sighting in our weapons a couple weeks before we went on the trip, I look over when we were out at Crosley, and Doug was shooting his 30-30. His 30-30, and as our German friends say, and I was like, man, his eye's awful close to that scope. And I looked away and fiddled with some stuff, and I turned back around, and he got blood everywhere. I was like, oh, well, it jumped back and bit him. So I thought, well, surely he's going to get that taken care of. So we're getting back to the lodge and on one of the hunts on this trip, and I come back, and I'm like, uh-oh. It bit him again. And I was like, there has got to be a reason this man is doing this. And then it dawned on me that women like scars. They think they're sexy. I know what you're up to. Right? Oh, yeah, so in the solo cup, we put a few Band-Aids and an eye patch and some other things, so just so that was part of his trophy. So, but every time you look at that, you'll be thinking that's a special memory. So,
I'll tell you, I'm honored to have it because not everybody gets one.
That is true. Anton won when he went. He had the longest shot. We did it for that year, and then we've done for different reasons and different things. We're let the hunt define kind of. And this time, Danny's head was already big enough, so we gave it to Doug. Yeah, he came back from the one hunt. We had to take him in through the side door because the one was too big. His head was too big to go through the. So anyhow, so we're continuing Captain Caveman tonight, and we're going to do a little bit of a review before we get going here. So throw out a couple terms that you've learned that we shouldn't use as Christians. Throw them out. Mother Earth, prehistoric, millions of years, missing link, Mother Nature, Stone Age. Yeah, ape man, Neanderthal, this idea of Stone Age and Iron Age and all that. You guys are great. So we got to talking about some different things, and we got to talking about oop arts. Who knows what an oop art is? I'm not going to say it. Oh, accidental. Anyway, okay, out of place artifact. It's another Doug joke, but I ain't going there. He'll throw his hands out and go out the door. Yeah. So, out of place artifacts. So what do we mean out of place artifacts? Why would something be out of place? They can't figure it out? Say it again. Can't explain it. What prevents them from being able to explain it? What is the problem? What? It doesn't fit their timeline. So they have an already established timeline, so when they discover something, it must fit the timeline, not the timeline fitting the artifact. See how it's backwards? See, so many times in science we hear, or in forensics and stuff like this, we'll go where the evidence leads us. Baloney. Baloney. They already have a preconceived set of ideas that if it doesn't fit, then you'll hear phrases like this: I just can't believe it. We can't explain it. Well, you can explain certain things if you allow them to be what they are. If you don't have any preconceived notions. Now, to be honest, we do have preconceived notions as Christians because we go according to what the Bible says. But for a Christian, can you name an out-of-place artifact if you have a biblical worldview? No such thing, is there? It's only out of place because their worldview says there's no way they could have done this. They weren't intelligent enough. And that's that whole dynamic. And so we talked about a few of these. We first talked about the Antikythera mechanism. Who can tell me what this is? One at a time. Give me a hand here so we can have one at a time. It sounds like a vacuum. All right, go ahead. Track the movement of the stars. Navigational piece of equipment. It could do many things. It could track the stars. And so at that time, they said there was 5 planets that they knew about. They were able to track those. So it was very, I think, I'm going to show you, I've got another video. I think this is one of the things in there that gives us some more details about its capabilities and the fact that it was actually an analog computer. That's how magnificent this piece of equipment was. But it's out of place because surely these people couldn't have figured these things out. They're not that advanced. Aliens, yeah, that's where they go every time. So, and then we talked about this other thing here called the Baghdad battery. You can tell me what this is. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but what do we say about this? Anybody remember? Yeah. And it essentially puts out about 4 volts. And if you daisy chained a few of these together, that you could get enough to do electroplating. Pretty amazing, right? Anybody here could figure that one out on their own? Just without looking it up on Google? Just be like, I think I'm going to make something to give me electricity, and then figure how to just basically conceive of this in a way that you could get electrical charges out of it that you could allow you to plate items with gold or copper. It's pretty amazing, right? Okay, long time ago these things took place. Then we talked about this interesting thing. You guys remember what these are? Flutes. Okay, and why is this interesting? Yeah, I mean, there's so much of mathematics that show up in music. And the exact same musical scales that are present now are present in these instruments. Well, how did they figure that out? What are the chances of that being coincidence? It's because that they were able to figure that out because they were extremely intelligent people. So then we talked about this. What was significant about this? Okay, Damascus steel. Now, we understand the process of how to do Damascus today, but the composition of the metal that they used back in that day, that's what they couldn't figure out. They could understand to layer metal upon layer, fold it over, or create layered billets, and then once they got that, to cut it in half and then layer it and forge weld it again. In fact, while we were on the hunt, we watched some of that down in Florida on Forged in Fire. They were doing Damascus. Well, they know the process, but what's the amazing thing that we couldn't figure out? And we're still not sure if they've completely figured out, but I think they've reverse engineered it to understand and done some things. So what couldn't they figure out? Keith? The composition of the steel, and you wouldn't think these two things would be part of the steel. You usually think of something that's very hard and metallic, but these two items were present in it. Wood? Yeah, well, that was actually in the concrete, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But organic items like wood that were actually mixed in with the metals that gave it the correct carbon amount of carbon in it that made it incredibly hard, but at the same time pliable and sharpened, able to be sharpened. And it's just incredible understanding of how to make weapons. It's amazing, and they've only recently been able to figure out that composition. Okay, and we talked about the Roman concrete, and that's where the volcanic ash comes in. Again, our concrete lasts about how long? 70, 80 years, and this is lasting thousands. But we know more, right? Okay. Now, we touched base on some other concepts, but we started to talk about this, about the presence of these walls and pyramids and ziggurats and mounds that are present all over the world. And we talked about some of these that were just on every continent, different stuff, but there's a commonality in what do they have in common? Beth? Oh, the Babel. Okay, so that we believe that possibly that Babel was the starting point for this, but these structures have what in common? Okay, they're shape. What else? More than shape. Design. Okay, size. Okay, and when you're building something, when you talk about shape, what's the word that we use? Say it. Architecture. The architecture is very similar. And then to achieve certain architecture, it's important that you have what abilities? Okay, design. Mathematics. Yeah, the mathematics is incredibly important here. Yeah, because, yeah, the techniques, the building techniques, right? I mean, when they see the way that these rocks are quarried and placed and similar things, so they have similar architecture, but they can also identify the techniques that they used are similar. How is this possible? We come back to a central event, biblically speaking, Babel, right? And what were they doing there? There was a building project, right? And so at that point in time, who's present? Just everybody, right? Everybody's present, so there's a great amount of knowledge and understanding in one place, and they thought we were going to do something pretty good here, right? And so after that moment where they had begun building this and obviously employing these techniques, then after that we have what? The scattering and dispersion, and then we end up with this all over the world. Does that make sense? Is that hard to explain? It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Now, if you come from a evolutionary perspective, you're going to have some problems. And so every time, how many here been to one of these? Any one of these, whether it's a ziggurat, a temple, a pyramid, or any of the mounds or anything like that? You guys have been to it? And you have a very analytical mind, Gary, as far as building things. Were you amazed? Just terraces and foundations and yeah, and that's just one place. And as far as I understand, as far as scope and size, don't even come close to the pyramids of Egypt. Well, how'd they do it? They weren't that smart. I mean, they don't have the technology we have today. We passed a crane on the interstate, and it had how many vehicles for this one crane? Half a dozen? For a crane that we know that would be necessary to build something like that today. Could we figure it out? I don't know. Very interesting. So we have these walls and pyramids and ziggurats and mounds, and let's see, I believe, all right, we talked about this one, which is in what state? Okay, now what's remarkable about this? We talked about, there was a little bit of a biblical link there possibly, but I think that is I will say that's a stretch. But the aerial view of this, would it be difficult to construct something that looks this from the ground without any kind of aerial perspective? I mean, it's not impossible, but it would be difficult. Now, we know of other things that are much bigger than this, that they're able to look like certain animals and things where they've made these carvings into the ground. And a lot of things that have to do with star positions, that they're marking things on the ground according to star positions, and now we come back to Oak Island, the curse of Oak Island. And so, never mind. All right, so, all right, we're not going there. All right, so that's a whole other thing. But, so we have technology. Now, let me ask you a question. So let's say that you have a group of people, and there's the possibility of a neighboring nation that's going to attack. What could you do to be prepared? Build a wall. Okay, so we know that happened, right? Where do we know that there's quite a significant wall that was built? China. Okay, can be seen from outer space. What else? What else might you do to build a wall? Supplies. Okay, did I hear the word underground? Okay, so maybe some sort of a fortress or something like that. So what we find in numerous places that I wasn't even aware these things existed until I started studying this, that there are underground fortresses that they can't explain all these things. The one we talked about was in Cappadocia, Turkey, which is Derinkuyu. Let me see if, yeah. These are some of the slides and what it looks like. Now, think about this. If you're going to put a number of people underground, what certain things do you have to take into account for? Water, food, air, temperature. What'd you say? Absolutely, you have to take that into account. If you're underground with a number of people, that has to be a consideration. So sanitation is an incredibly important thing that they had to account for. Now, this place here was massive. I believe it went as far as 250 feet underground, multiple rooms. Now, how many people do you think this was designed to hold? Give me a number. I mean, realistically, thinking about what they were, how many people could this support? Food, water, sanitation, air, all that stuff. What do you think would be a reasonable amount of a number of people that could? 100? 10,000? Could 10,000 people underground, really? Actually, this thing could hold 20,000. 20,000 people this could sustain. It's where they've quarried it out into rooms. Now, there may be an existing space that they modified, but, if you start looking around, it's more than just a cave system. Oh, back up. Back up. Okay. All right, so we've got water. Now, another thing I didn't get a picture of for you, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit. Ventilation, food storage, all these things. That blank there is aqueducts. We're going to talk about, show you a short video here in a little while of Hezekiah's tunnel. Okay, you guys ever heard of that? Okay, we're going to find out about Hezekiah's tunnel. And then we'll talk about a little bit more. So before we need to make sure we leave time to discuss true anthropology here. So I want to show you this video. Here are 10 of these ooparts that they can't explain that are amazing. And some of these have overlapped with some of the things we talked about. The first one's going to give you some details about Greek fire. You guys remember that? Okay, so let's watch this. All right, what do you think? Pretty amazing, right? Now, these, that's just some of what's out there. And so when we talk about the amount of knowledge to create 16-ton perfect sphere, what will we need today to do that? To create one. All kinds of hydraulic things and chisels and tunnels. Yeah. So it would just thinking about how that's possible. Well, it's hard for us to even think how we would do it with our technology today. And so there's things like this all over the world from antiquity. And so the question then, well, I hate to show this right now, but what do you guys know about Hezekiah's tunnel? Should know something right off the bat. Yeah, Hezekiah built a tunnel. Yeah, so what about it? Where's it at? Jerusalem. It was an aqueduct. It was so that they could endure siege. They were able to bring fresh water in and endure a siege, and so they constructed this tunnel. And again, this is a long time ago. And so being able to have the knowledge to be able to do this, it was pretty remarkable that they were able to construct this. Tell you what, I've got a picture of an ancient map that, again, just another example. We talk about the ability to navigate and to do cartography and mapping and that kind of stuff. Simply amazing. And there's stuff that show, there's actually maps of North and South America that predate Columbus and all those, Amerigo Vespucci, and there's things like that. So there's ancient maps that, how could they possibly accurately do that? The mathematics is incredible. We were at the ocean this week, and you could see the curvature right from where we were at. So far you can see. But to be able to map a coastline, I mean, just simply amazing accurately. You'd have to have incredible math skills and things like that. Now, let's talk about this. What does God's Word say about who early man was? And we talk about evidence in Scripture of intelligence. We talk about true anthropology. So we automatically, when we go to these things, we talk about early man. From a biblical perspective, there's no other place to go other than Genesis. And so we know in chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, we see this take place. Then God said, let us make man in our image, chapter 1, verse 26. Make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female. He created them. So, what do we mean in God's image? God is, what is God? Is God, does he, so we're created in the way that we look like him? I mean, that's what an image is, right? Is that what this means? Okay. So what does it mean in God's image? What are we talking about? Okay. So, okay. Okay, so we talk about that God, this is an interesting phrase that philosophers use, is a mind, basically that has the ability to think and reason. We say that God has that ability, yes. Has he conveyed this image, this to us? He has. He's given us the ability to think and to reason. What else has God given us according to his nature that is part of who we are? Character, okay. In a sense. Feelings, okay, we're feeling creatures, yes. Okay, we have consciousness, we have personhood. Yes, Keith? Okay, so we have that ties into this ability to think and to reason. We're curious. Okay. Okay, soul. So there is a spiritual aspect to this, and in that way God is spirit, and he has breathed spirit into us. What about this idea of volition? What do I mean when I say volition? It's a tricky word. Okay. What about free will? Volition is the ability to make your own decisions, to choose. Has God given us that ability? Has he given us volition? Okay, so he's given us a lot of aspects of his image. Now, are there anything that God has not given us? Yeah, so there's certain things about God that we can never be all-knowing, we can never be omnipresent, we can never be all-powerful. There are certain things that belong only to him, but there are certain aspects of his being that he has conveyed to us. One of you said feelings, but more specifically, emotions, love, the ability to love. So these are the things that that we have been created in his image. And so, since we've been created in his image, we have inherent value as persons and people. And so when we talk about the ability to think and to reason, in what sense? In a very basic sense, complex? When it says, who's he talking about when he creates in the, verse 26 and 27? Who are we talking about here? We're talking about Adam, right? So Adam was created in what form? Little baby? A man. So as created as a man, what must we assume as he was created in this state as a man? And we know that Eve in the same way was, right? Created as an adult woman. I'm sorry? Very intelligent, okay. So how do we know that? Okay, so that is a key thing that we're going to talk about here shortly, is that from the beginning, what is one of the earmarks of intelligence? Go ahead. Okay, so they were made in a perfect sense, there was no sin, so that we know their condition of things was perfection at that point in time, yes. So what is one of the primary earmarks of intelligence? That we can know that what separates us, one of the things that separates us from the animal world? Reason, okay. What was that? Communication, yeah. We speak and communicate. We have language. That's one of the things like this. So when Adam came out, did he have to learn his ABCs and how to talk? Why not? Because he was obviously created with what? The ability to communicate right from the get-go. So obviously if he's able to communicate right from the get-go, was there a process of him, trying to form words and not understanding and all this kind of stuff? Is that the way it was? We have to assume what? It was all there from the beginning. And you bring up one of the things is before Eve was created, God gave Adam a job. Right. We're going to talk about that shortly. But before Eve was created, God gave Adam a job. What was the job? Name the animals, right? How's that possible? There had to be some baseline of knowledge that God bestowed him with, right? So he was an extremely intelligent creature being from the get-go, and so Eve was as well. And so we talk about then that sin is introduced into the world through their free will decisions, and now we begin that downward spiral. And I would say that I would agree with the biblical scholars that Adam and Eve were the pinnacle of intelligence, not the bottom. The pinnacle, the top, is pure, undefiled. And so from there, it's actually gone downward. But we don't think that way, do we? We think what? That now, we're talking about capacity at this point. You understand what I'm saying here? That, because what do we find throughout history as we've studied it, as far as technology and knowledge and things like that, what has happened? Right? What happened why do we call it the Dark Ages? It was dark. Sun didn't shine. Yeah, there was a lack of knowledge. The storehouses of the world's knowledge were destroyed, right? Intentionally. Am I right on that? historians, and so there was not an availability of things that could be learned. So at this point in time, there's and then we have on the heels of that, what historical period do we call, things like the Enlightenment period, and where things are kind of coming back around, and we have this explosion of things that occurs. And what's that? Yeah, that comes in the 1800s and so forth. Yeah. Then we talk about the Industrial Revolution, which has changed everything. But when we talk about the ability, the capacity, and all these kind of things, it's extremely important. Now, do we have any evidence? Do we have any evidence of the fact that man was smart from the beginning, other than just making some assumptions here? And that's where a much overlooked passage of Scripture, this is one that we really need to pay better attention to, and that's chapter 4. Chapter 4. So we find Adam and Eve's 2 kids, right? 2 knuckleheads that don't know nothing. No, again, intelligent being. What do we know about these 2 guys? What did they do? Okay, one was basically a farmer, right? And the other was musician? Shepherd. Yeah, he was a keeper of the flocks. So Abel was a keeper of the flocks. Cain was a tiller of the ground. So that inquires some sort of understanding of the animal world. And so here we find that there was farming and farming techniques and things that were involved to supply their food. Where did they learn that? Yeah, and where did their parents learn it? I mean, God obviously gave them these understandings. Let me ask you this question. Let's say you're the only 2 people on the earth. You're kicked out of the garden, and God says you can eat anything you want. I mean, once you're out, you've been kicked out. Now there's food around, right? And so you come across some mushrooms on the ground. You're the only man, and you eat the wrong one. What do we have? You're dead. So how did they figure all that out? Trial and error is a tough thing when you die. Well, they obviously knew. Mushrooms, no, they're delicious. No, see what I'm saying? Are there many different things that we could eat that could kill us, right? Well, how did we figure that out? Was it trial and error? Certainly. It's knowledge that they were given, I believe. And then from there it went on. Techniques and things like this, how they, I don't think everything was discovered. I think some of it was revealed. Now, are there some things that were discovered? Certainly. But I believe a lot of things in these cases, especially with Adam and Eve and on from down, that were revealed to them, their abilities to do things. So, what about over in chapter 4, verses 20 through 22? This is the scripture I think we pass over, and it's just kind of like, okay, whatever. And after Adam, verse 22, gave birth to Jabal, he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah, and so forth and so on. So let's see, how many verses do we have? 20 through 22. Okay, so what do we have right here just in these verses? Let's start with verse 20. What's that? Okay, so they were able to places to live, right, as far as tents, but also what did we have here? That have livestock. That's animal husbandry, right? So is that a simple thing? I mean, it can be simple, but is there more to it? What's involved in flocks and stuff? Is it just whatever? We'll just see what happens? Yeah, I mean, there's certain things, and how you go about feeding and watering and caring and protecting, all those kind of things, that requires intelligence, doesn't it? Well, what about in verse 21? What do we have? Music. Again, that's musical technology. When we talk about instruments, what do we know about a lyre? I'm not talking about Congress. I'm talking about L-Y-R-E with a Y. Okay, so that's obviously some basic musical technology to create instruments, right? And a pipe would be similar to those flutes that we saw, right? So again, with musical scales and that kind of stuff, I'm not very up on that. We have a lot of musicians here that understand those different things, but those are very mathematically based, and it's based in understanding and intelligence and technology. And then we have the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. Now, what does this debunk right off the bat? What words from our beginning things? Stone Age and Iron Age, right? And Bronze Age, right? It's all right here. Now, how far is this from Adam and Eve? Thousands of years. Just a couple generations, right? What goes into forging? Okay, fire. What else? Where do they find that? Like, oh, look, metal. You got to mine it somehow, right? Has anybody ever just came across a chunk of iron? Now, help me out here. Bronze is not its own thing, is it? It's an alloy. So what do you need for something to be an alloy? It's a composition, right? Well, where'd they get that idea? Accident, right? You know, one guy tripped with the hot thing and poured in the other, and like, oh, look, bronze. Think about the concept of creating an alloy. Chapter 4. Just a few generations. So we have metallurgy, we have animal husbandry, we have musical technology. What about in Job 28, 1 and 2? Anybody have that? I knew Phil would. You're good. You're good. All right, go for it, Phil. We're verses 1 and 2. We got iron and gold. Now, where did they get the idea to refine metals? Let's just heat this up in a crucible of some kind and be able to handle it properly and be able to be like, well, that stuff doesn't look like it should go on there. Let's take that off, like the dross, right? And then let's see what's left over and all. I mean, really, you think that's how it happened? It was trial and error? There had to be some sort of baseline knowledge that existed in Adam and Eve that passed these things. What? Now, when did Job take place, biblically speaking, timeline? Way later? You know, like around the kings and all that stuff? Some believe, as far as this book's concerned, it's actually time frame. Early in Genesis is when they believe Job existed. And he's talking about mining, copper and gold. What else was it, Phil? Are you still there? Silver, and then refining techniques. I mean, come on. How's that possible? From a worldly perspective, it's not. There's no such thing. And then Romans 1:25. Why did I include that? Anybody know why I would include that? What's it say? Anybody have it? Go ahead, Kelly. Read that first phrase again really loud. There you go. All right, we're not going to watch Hezekiah's tunnel. You can look that up on the internet. Look up Hezekiah's tunnel. There's that map. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, think about that. Glass. I mean, that's a cool tech. Have you ever been able to go to a glass and watch them do that stuff? That's awesome. Yeah, but they did it like, you know. So, all this said, we come around to this. Captain Caveman? No. No such thing. I love that cartoon too. It's funny. No such thing. From a biblical perspective, there's no such thing as a new part. Go ahead, Paul. Sure. Sure. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm telling you. I've told you this before. The further we get into understanding the intricacies of the universe and also the human body and the cell and all this stuff, the more they're being pushed towards an explanation to alien intelligence, because they cannot explain it from their point of view. There's hundreds of these things that makes no sense when you start with a naturalistic stuff, material is all there is from an evolutionary perspective. You cannot get to the proper understanding, and you have to do some crazy tap dances to get around this stuff. So let's make sure we teach our youngins and ourselves that we do the best we can to eliminate these words and ideas from our vernacular. All right, any other questions or comments? Mapping, intelligence, yeah, navigation and mapping. Yeah, how do they get around? I mean, how do they figure out to use the stars to navigate? That's incredible, right? Just absolutely incredible. How did they figure out things like mapping? To create a map, just incredible. All right, any other questions or comments? Go ahead. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yep. Sure. Well, what they do is say, okay, you guys understand why there's being billions of dollars spent to find stuff on Mars? You guys understand why they're bent on that? They're trying to find an explanation of, okay, well, if there's something there, then that something there might have used to been there, but now it's here, and what we are is probably what used to be there, which used to be somewhere else, but now it's gone. And the hero of all this is, did you get all that? Yeah. The hero of all this is billions of years. And when we really start to think about it, so I promise you, I'm telling you this now, Darwin's out the door. And they're having to go to alternate explanations because more and more scientists are moving away from an evolutionary perspective, and they're having to find some sort of source that's still within this box, because they can't come outside the box. They have to stay within the natural. They can't come out to the supernatural. They have to find a reason inside the box. The fundamental problem with that is they can't explain the existence of the box. And that's where we always went out on a supernatural explanation. It's much more logical than their position. All right, anything else? Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed that. I was really looking forward to this study.